Okay, so the meeting's being recorded, so you've got the option to watch it back at a later date. If you've got any questions as we go along, just please feel free to type them, and I'll answer them as we go. So the idea of this session is just to go through the assignment and just to give you a few sort of pointers in terms of things that I'm looking for and places to look for sort of additional information to help you produce the assignment. So I've got up on the screen the assignment that you're going to be doing. Now, the first task is a scenario-based question. Now, crucially, for this question, I'm not really all that interested in the specifics of the scenario. So you don't need to worry too much about the backstory of this hotel that we're talking about. The crucial part is that you address the question that is laid out for you in question 1. So the first question relates specifically to the 7 tasks there that are to do with sort of managing an enterprise and specifically looking at sustainable development. Now, there's a really simple formula that you can follow in order to address these particular tasks. So what I'm looking for in each case is a very brief definition of what it means, and then what you would need to do in order to address that in the scenario of a hotel complex, given the elements that are provided for you in the question. So crucial information that we have in the question is that we have specific stakeholders that we can see. So we'll come on to that in a moment. And then we've got information about the way the business functions. So 60% year-round average bookings, and then local customers providing additional support for restaurant and other facilities. And then we've got some information about the other facilities itself, and then the extensive grounds. So we need to factor those in and take those into account when we are answering and addressing the key points here. So, for example, performing a stakeholder analysis. So who are the stakeholders, and crucially, what are their interests in our hotel? So we can see there by looking at the scenario that our stakeholders are 2 owners. So they're going to have obviously a significant interest. An accountant, so all they're going to primarily be interested in is that whatever we choose to do is financially viable and makes sense. We have employee representatives, so they're going to be interested in ensuring that the employees' interests are taken into account. And then representatives of local businesses, so they're going to be interested in what we can do to help make our enterprise, if you like, as attractive to them. And then we've got two other shareholders we don't really have much information on. So, what are the stakeholders? What are their perspectives? Okay, so we've got to think about how you would carry out this and what we might find, but you don't actually have to carry it out in terms of producing the report. So, for example, formulating a sustainable development policy. Now, I'm not going to expect you to necessarily develop a detailed policy, but what we'd be interested in is what kinds of things would we need to include in a sustainable development policy, particularly within this context. Looking at an implementation plan, what would you contain within the implementation plan and how would you carry it out? Looking at developing a supportive corporate culture. Well, what do we mean by a supportive corporate culture? How do we develop corporate cultures, and specifically, how do we link corporate culture to sustainability? Looking at measures and standards of performance, how can we measure our hopefully increasing sustainable credentials? Preparing relevant reports. What kind of reports might be needed, particularly in relation to the sustainability aspect, to show that we are making the right kinds of moves? And looking at our internal monitoring processes. So what kinds of internal monitoring processes do we need to think about in relation to sustainability? Now, I know that points 1 and 2 have got quite a lot of information included within the materials themselves, and you're sort of left a little bit to your own devices to look at points 3 to 7. But what I'm really interested in here is that you look at the kinds of activities that are going to be needed in order to address these from the perspective of sustainability, and that we use supporting literature to help ensure that what we do is not just simply your own ideas. So, for example, formulating a sustainable development policy, you're going to find plenty of articles out there that actually, define what we mean by sustainable development policy, and perhaps look at the kinds of things that need to be included within it. Now, if you can find a few different sources of information, maybe they show the same thing, maybe they include different aspects. What that will allow you to do is to really demonstrate that you've looked at a variety of different viewpoints in each case. Now, some of these points are going to be more detailed and well developed compared to others. So, for example, preparing relevant reports, you may just be stating what sort of reports you're going to prepare, what's going to be within them, and how that links to sustainability, along with perhaps a couple of references. Other areas are going to be a little bit more detailed, such as developing a supportive culture and looking at implementation plans. Now, I'm very loath to say that you should split this up along the lines of the word allocation. So, for example, task 1 carries 70% of the marks for this particular assignment, and there are 7 stages that you're going to be talking about, and therefore it would be easy to say, well, why not just allocate 10% of my words to each of those, which would give you, somewhere in the region of about 300 words to play with for each one. Well, some of them may take slightly less than 300, some of them are going to take slightly more than 300. So really look at which of these areas is going to need the most detail. And remember to, whilst we do have a context that I want you to try and apply it to, don't be too slavish about the backstory. Don't waste words messing around with the backstory for your hotel. Okay, your hotel is what your hotel is. It is where it is. And then you need to get on with how you can develop your business by undertaking each of these 7 aspects. Now, obviously, things like measures and standards of performance, supportive corporate cultures, implementation plans, they do need to be linked to this idea that you're trying to grow and develop a hotel complex. So I don't necessarily want to see implementation plans talked about in relation to sustainable energy development, for example. That's not going to be as relevant to the assignment that you're looking at. So try and keep it specific, but crucially, you're going to need to do some background work to find out the sorts of things that so looking at point 4 there, what does a supportive culture mean, and how do we develop a supportive corporate culture, and how do sustainability goals impact upon a supportive corporate culture? What measures and standards of performance would we expect for a sustainable business, one that is engaged in sustainability practice? And perhaps what reports might we need to do? So you need to do some background work around those areas. So this assessment is actually testing your ability to undertake a degree of research by yourself as well. Now, as we move into question 2 is perhaps a little bit more straightforward. So this is looking at the payments for environmental services scheme. And you're going to look at a short essay, so carrying about 30% of the marks, so no more than sort of 900 to 1,000 words. That should be ample wordage in order to enable you to undertake the work that you need to undertake. And within that, then, you're going to be looking at the advantages and limitations, so advantages and disadvantages, and then the challenges and opportunities that you could have in terms of using PES. So it's almost like a SWOT analysis. So you're looking at the sort of strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats in terms of using this approach. Now, just as a sort of very, very quick start point, just to give you a little bit of advice, I'm just going to share my screen with you here. So if you just bear with me for a moment. I'm just going to share my internet browser that I'm sort of currently looking at. And okay, so here is the assignment that you guys are looking at the moment. So I've got that up on my screen, and the supporting document which outlines the payment of environmental services scheme and the kinds of things that it's involved in. Now, a really good place to start looking for information is on Google Scholar. Now, Google Scholar will contain a lot of peer-reviewed articles and books, and I find it a really, really nice place just to start, because what we can find is a lot of open source journal articles and materials. So as you can see, all I popped in here are PES schemes, and we can see a whole series of hits in terms of journal articles and ideas that have kind of come out of this. And if you look here on the right hand side, if you get a either PDF or HTML link on the right hand side, it means that you can get that particular journal article for free through using Google Scholar. So you can see that just from Googling PES schemes and putting that through Google Scholar, you can see that I've got quite a lot of links here that we can use freely. So here's an interesting one. So access and benefits in payments for environmental services, lessons from 7 PES schemes. So I'm just going to have a look at that particular article, and you can see here that we've got a good peer-reviewed article from a good publisher. And if you have a look at the abstract, so it's looking at the findings from 7 payment for environmental services schemes and assess the impacts on livelihood and implications for incentive mechanisms. So this is actually a really good article, a really good start point for looking at the sort of benefits and drawbacks of PES schemes. So you're not going to have to go far to make a start on this particular task. So probably of the 2 tasks, this is going to be the easiest. Some people have emailed me to say that they're sort of struggling with this element of it, but actually, once you start getting the information in, it becomes quite straightforward. So here's another useful one. So designing payments for ecosystem services, lessons from previous experiences. So that's the sort of stuff that we're looking for. Sorry. So there's plenty of sort of opportunities here. Now, crucially, I'm just going to stop sharing. I'm going to pull the assignment back up. I mean, crucially here in assignment 2, you can see that you need to provide examples and references to existing schemes. Now, a lot of those articles that we just saw on Google Scholar do have references to existing schemes, so you'll be able to find plenty of examples through there. You can also look up PES schemes. They tend to be listed. Each country will list the kinds of schemes that they're involved in, and then in your conclusion, you need to look at whether or not you believe the information that you found to be worthwhile. Okay, Howard, I see what you're saying. I'm just going to try one more thing with my microphone and see if I can get it to work. Bear with me a second. Is that any better at all? I realised I was cutting in and out before. Does that sound a little better to you guys? Okay, I should assume that's somewhat improved. Good. So there are plenty of journal articles to get you started on that second part of the assignment just by looking at Google Scholar. So it's a really, really good start point, and we've already identified where they are for free. Once you've looked at the advantages and limitations, challenges and opportunities, now it's important that you do look at those 4 things. So that you use peer-reviewed literature to consider all 4 of the advantages, limitations, challenges and opportunities in general. And you can use specific examples to back that up. So specific examples where there have been tangible benefits for the advantages. Areas where there have been, perhaps it hasn't worked as well for the limitations. Perhaps you'll find some good case studies that can help support the discussion of the challenges. And then areas where there are opportunities for greater use of PES schemes. Finally, then, you need to conclude on whether or not you believe the PES schemes to be worthwhile. So that needs to be based upon the balance of evidence that you have presented. If you feel that you presented a stronger argument in the pro-PES schemes area, then you need to conclude that way. If you feel that you have presented a stronger argument in the in an area that's against PES schemes, then you need to conclude that way. So try not to be too influenced by your own opinions as you draw your conclusions based upon what you have investigated. So that particular task is actually relatively straightforward. And again, for question 1, we're not looking for anything too complex. We're just looking for an appreciation of what these 7 components mean and the kinds of things that you would need to include in order to have a sustainable agenda within them. Right, so that's just a very quick run through of the sorts of things that we're looking for in the assignment. So do you have any specific questions on areas that maybe you've looked at already or things that you're not sure about? Okay, so Howard, you seem relatively happy with what you need to do. Okay, that's a very good question, Philip, in terms of relevance reports. Yeah, so developing or preparing relevant reports. So we've got a balance to strike here. We're looking for a sustainable business. So we're going to need to have reports that are going to be relevant in terms of perhaps environmental impact, those that are going to be related to perhaps sort of community engagement. Those are the kinds of reports that we're looking at. Reports that are going to balance the issues of business development and sustainability. So there are obviously a lot of reports that a business could produce, but then there are some that are not going to be that relevant. If we want to think about perhaps, for example, reports that are going to satisfy our stakeholders, well, we're going to want some kind of financial report that's going to perhaps identify the financial benefit of sustainability for our accountant. We're going to need a report that's going to look at the furthering of sustainable objectives that's going to be useful for the employees. Okay, so really in terms of the relevancy of reports, you can argue a whole variety of different reports that you believe are relevant. But perhaps a good start point would be to look for reports that are relevant in a sustainable business. Yeah, so water use could be a relevant report. So I mean, sustainable reporting in itself is looking at sort of perhaps values and governance. So linking between strategy and commitment to sustainability. So obviously, the main overriding strategy here in the business would be to develop the business and improve productivity, and how that can link to sustainability. So it helps us to maybe understand the the economic and environmental value, setting goals. So there's a whole sort of variety of different things that we could include within what we call sustainable reporting. Okay, and generally it doesn't link to the financial elements. Okay, so none of these sort of other things. Okay, so there are lots of different elements that you can contain within sustainable or sort of reporting the sustainable. Okay, so I can see that Howard is just popping together a question. Yeah, I mean, definitely, Howard. You could certainly bring in some of the elements that you can find within the sort of ISO 14000 group, and it's sort of maybe is a good place to start in terms of looking at structures and approaches. Yeah, Philip. I mean, only kind of briefly in terms of the reports and how you'd actually deploy them. Remember that the crucial thing here is sort of justifying the reason why the report would be a useful thing to have, rather than going into all the sort of mechanics of how the report would be produced and when it would be produced and those kinds of things. What we're looking at here is a sort of a reasoned justification for the inclusion of things within the strategy, rather than just the actual development of how it would work. It's a kind of fine line you've got to walk here. So you don't actually have to design the reports. I don't want to see what's in the reports and sort of the structure and outline of the reports and those kinds of things, but I need to know what the reports would be. So it's kind of a fine line you need to walk with all 7 really, and getting the balance between making sure that you get across the purpose and aim within them, as well as without kind of going into far too much detail in terms of the actual mechanics of deployment. So do either of you two have any more questions? I have enabled your microphones if you find it easier to speak rather than type. I can indeed, yes. I have. Um, well, I suppose if you sign up to an ISO framework and you fail to adhere to it, then you can lose that accreditation, can't you? And that is probably about as far as it goes to an extent. But as long as you don't do anything that's directly damaging to the environment, then I can't see legal culpability being there. I mean, I'm not a legal expert by any stretch. I think what we're sort of more interested in here is trying to promote something positive. So, I mean, if you want to refer to aspects of ISO 14000, that's fine. But I mean, in terms of going into the nitty gritty, I wouldn't go that far. I can hear you, Philip. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, I can understand where you're coming from with that. I mean, what we're looking at is we're saying how can we um, encourage the culture within this organisation that we're talking about here, the Hotel X, whatever we want to call it. How can we help develop that culture so that they can take on board and they can help to champion the sustainable objectives that we're laying out for ourselves? So the supportive aspect is being supportive of our sustainable goals. Okay, that's the crucial aspect there. So I mean, um, obviously, different countries have got different attitudes towards sustainability objectives and those kinds of things. But if we're going to say to ourselves, right, our our organisation is going to sign up to this sustainable agenda, then point four is about how we would develop our company's culture to enable the sustainable objectives to be supported. Exactly, that's how I perceive. Uh, that's the reasoning I'm looking for really. So it's a case of, you can do some background work looking at how you would develop a corporate culture. So how do we kind of make corporate cultures and how do we embed them? And then you're right, you're talking about the right kinds of things in terms of sustainability there. How do we make sure that the people working in our hotel live and breathe these ideas rather than just the company saying we're going to do it. We need everybody to support it. Yeah, I mean, like how I was just talking about with the ISO 14000, which is sort of a family of sort of standards, looking at practical tools to look at environmental responsibilities. That could be a really good start place to look at standards of performance. Um, from there, then you can look at elements that would be relevant to um, the sort of hotel and its development. Yeah, I think that's the type of information that we're looking for. Um, you can't just make up standards and measures off the top of your head. You need to look to examples and codes to help you with that. I mean, the crucial part is that the whatever you choose to present here uh, needs to sort of logically fit with the kind of context that we're looking at. Okay, so I mean, for example, um, ISO 14064 looks at greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, we're maybe less interested in that as an element and more interested in perhaps how we could incorporate eco design in what we're doing. So that's just, make sure that whatever you include there in point 5 is relevant to the context as well. Okay, well, to an extent, that what you include there will be influenced by what you've included in some of the earlier points. So um, let's go. For example, perhaps one of the objectives you're going to set yourself is to reduce the amount of non-recyclable waste in the organization. Okay, maybe that's one of the examples that you set kind of early on, and one of the reports that you're going to um, have is going to be on the amount of non-recyclable waste. So internal monitoring processes could be, linked to ensuring that recyclable and non-recyclable waste is separated effectively, ensuring that recyclables are not put in with non-recyclables, and how that would be, um, how that sort of waste management and how it could be monitored more effectively. Now, whether that's, as you're saying, by putting somebody in place, whether it's a case of random inspection, or however you think it would work most effectively, you just need to think about the ways in which you feel that what processes you need to put in place to try and meet some of the objectives that you talked about in the earlier points, and how those could be done most effectively. Again, you might find examples elsewhere, or you may need to come up with your own ideas that are sort of linked to established practice. Yes. Yeah, I think you can use Google Scholar for whatever you want to use. But it's just a really good tool because it specifically searches for published material rather than just websites. It's a really good tool. My I was gonna say my plan for what I normally do in my modules is that once I've had draft submissions, so remember you're allowed to submit a draft up to 2 weeks before the final submission. I go through the drafts, and then we have another session like this where I will look at the good practice from the drafts, and then areas where people maybe getting things wrong in the drafts, so that we can sort of address those, and then people can go away and make corrections. Put a draft together, send it over to me. I will give you some written feedback, and then we'll have another one of these sessions, probably around about a week before submission. They'll just pull together all the ideas from the drafts. Um, However you want to, and I will accept um, a draft of the entire assignment if you want me to look at a draft of the entire assignment. That's fine. Anything up to that. I mean, if you write it all and you finish it and you want me to look at all of it, then I will look at all of it. Sorry, Howard, were you asking a question? Yeah, that's always I mean, the beauty of and the sustainability module doesn't have a lot of students, so I've got more time to have a look at more detailed drafts. I'll also, in terms of feedback, I'll give you feedback on referencing, on sort of breadth of resources that you've used, on your structuring. We'll look at things that maybe don't need to be in there and things that you maybe need to add to. So I don't want you to feel like my feedback's going to come across as overly critical, but I'm going to make it as realistic as possible to help you guys out. Yes. Yeah. Right. Okay, you've got the equal owners, which you can count as one. Okay, because they're going to be essentially the same. Okay. Uh, then you've got so I'm just looking at it. So then the accountant you would count as one. Um, Employee representative and local business representative you can count. Now the other two shareholders we don't know what their interest is, so you can just assume that as long as we're not damaging the business, they're happy. So crucially, it's looking at owners, accountant, employee representative, and local business representative. So that cuts it down a little bit. Okay, that's my pleasure. And are you quite happy there, Howard? Is there anything else? Yeah, I mean the customers would definitely be. Yeah, yeah, I mean the stakeholder. You could definitely consider customers as stakeholders. You could argue that as an organisation furthers its sustainability agenda, then that appeals to a certain um, group of stakeholders who may become more interested in engaging with our business. So yeah, there's definitely some mileage there in considering customers as stakeholders, just because they're not mentioned as part of our board membership. Yeah, I definitely consider them. I think that sort of rounds it off quite nicely if we put customers in there as well. Yeah, customers are stakeholders as well. Definitely, it's worth including them. So I think what we've got here, Philip, we've got a slight. There should be another gap here. What we're saying is that undertaking sustainable development is a major departure, not the local sightseeing trips. Okay, so there should be, if you imagine another gap there, what we're saying is that that's just information about it, and then the idea of having sustainable development is a major departure, and therefore you're going to carry out those tasks. Okay, good. Is there anything else from you, Howard? Okay, good, wonderful. Well, look, this meeting has been recorded, and it'll be saved. And what you can do is you can just use the link on the on iLearn, and you can come back to watch it back if you want to. You do have the opportunity to submit a draft. So the submission is the 18th. So drafts would need to be in by the 4th of April. Okay. Let's have a look here. So the 4th of April is a week today. Yeah, a week today. I'm away for a couple of days at the beginning of next week, so if you get it to me by the end of this week, then I can have a look over the weekend and get it back to you with some feedback. And then towards the end of next week, or the beginning, or no later than the 11th, we'll have another one of these sessions to look at themes. Okay, so if there are no more specific questions from you both, I will stop the recording, and I look forward to receiving your drafts. That's my pleasure, and yeah, you can email me questions, and please feel free to send me your drafts. Goodbye. Thanks, gents. Bye.